Welcome back to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here as usual, and I'm very pleased to be joined by two colleagues here today. One is Chris Ryan, who has a storied history in filmmaking and in instructional design and product development, has taught many students, helped them all realize their professional aspirations, whether it's at Manhattan Prep or Kaplan Test Prep, and been wanting to get Chris on the show for a long time. So Chris, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. Those were very kind words.
Well, and hopefully they were all accurate. And then my other colleague is Dr. Jeff.
Oh, it's so fancy.
Koetje, Dr. Jeff. Jeff's been working in a number of different capacities, mainly focused on pre-health education, aspiring doctors, helping them understand how they may achieve their ambitions in life. And then also, I think of late, you've been more focused on helping grow and develop Kaplan's institutional partnerships and relationships there. So Jeff, also someone who I've talked to many times about trying to get on the podcast. So welcome, Jeff.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Mike. It's so great to be here.
Yeah. So yeah, with the collective brain space in this podcasting booth right now, we could toast some bread.
A Melba toast.
Yeah, lightly. So the three of us wanted to get together today to talk specifically about growth mindset, which is something I think a lot of people are familiar with. I think we'll try to reacquaint them with that idea. And then also seeing where and how we might connect growth mindset to some concepts around the imposter syndrome, stereotype bias, and then also mindfulness. So good news for our listeners, they're all very intricately related to one another, and we have two experts to join us to sort of explore this conversation. I thought we were going to start maybe with you, Chris. I know you've been doing a lot of growth mindset training, and as I warned both of you, we were going to talk about Carol Dweck and say that you better dweck yourself before you wreck yourself. So if you don't know about growth mindset, you better ask somebody. Yeah. And the person I'm going to ask about it right now, Chris, is you. So what is growth mindset? And can you give our listeners a quick summary of what it is? And then I think we can start maybe expanding that into how that ties to self-limiting beliefs, how that ties to challenging yourself and sort of maybe disrupting some of the stereotypes that may exist out in the world. But can you just give us a high-level view of what growth mindset is?
Yeah, and I'm having a meta moment here of imposter syndrome, whether that's an ER or an OR.
Oh, yes.
Because I do not have a PhD in psychology. I am not Carol Dweck,
right?
Like it or not.
Yes.
So as a result, but I play one on TV.
Sure.
I play
Carol, or on a podcast.
Yeah. So the way I come to growth mindset is through what it's kind of addressing, what the problem it's addressing. And the problem that it addresses is the rock slides in our heads of little thoughts when we encounter some difficulty, some challenge that cascade, and we're left with a giant boulder at the bottom that says, see, you're no good at this, and you should get out of this altogether, right? Just you are not good at X.
Right.
And that's your fixed mindset, right? There are other variations. The other big variation of fixed mindset is, yeah, people think you're good at X, and maybe you've shown yourself to be kind of good at X so far, but now you're kind of working at it, and it's harder and harder, and that means you're not really good at X. Either way, you're not really anointed. Either you're bad, or people think you're good, but you're really bad.
Right.
So, and you're born that way. Maybe I was born with it. So, or without it. So growth mindset is a way of countering that and kind of coming out of your ego shell that's full of shame about the fact that you think you're not good at this thing. And growth mindset, if I were going to encapsulate it in just a few words, would be, I can get better at this. I can get better at Basketball, I still have sort of fixed mindset about that. I really am terrible at it.
Yeah.
And have been all my life, but I believe that I don't have to actually stay that way. If I chose to, I could get better at basketball.
Yep.
Now that's not just that. Here's, growth mindset is a buzzword in a way all over the place. My 5-year-old, I don't know if I told you this, Mike, my 5-year-old now in kindergarten just got his first progress report, and growth mindset was in it.
Wow.
That they talk about growth mindset, just like sort of listing, these are things we, like we cover and
Sure.
So it is, if it's, reached the kindergartners, then it's kind of everywhere.
Right.
It's very easy to conflate growth mindset with just try harder.
Right.
Just work in it. It's not that. It's just a mindset. It's just an attitude that you can get better at it. And you need all the things that Carol Dweck herself, bless her name, says you need. You need passion. You got to care about the thing. You need to stick it out. You need persistence and grit and all that. And you need actual guidance to get better at basketball. I can't teach myself. I could go somewhere to learn it, but underneath all that, if I've got the passion and the persistence and the guidance, but I don't have growth mindset, if I really believe, all this is just going to either prove I've got it or I don't, and actually I don't think I have it,
right,
then it's just going to all fall apart.
Right. So, and there's plenty of examples of growth mindset that we run into at Kaplan, where folks come to us to help achieve their own personal ambitions, to sort of get past some of these milestones that are tied to how they perform on these tests. Frequently, we need to get them past their own self-limiting beliefs to believe that with focused effort and with some help, they can achieve more. And that's why I think there is a real aspirational element to growth mindset, something that I think resonates to all of us at Kaplan. The learning science is backing it up, although there's some interesting stuff that I have seen about growth mindset around traditionally underserved populations, which, frequently the students who aren't told that they're smart need to hear it, even though it runs counter to the prevailing wisdom around growth mindset, which argues, don't tell your kid they're smart, tell them that they've worked hard, and they should continue to work hard, because that's really how they will expand beyond their fixed mindset right now into the next level of their professional growth. Jeff, I wanted to kind of pivot a little more to you, because this is more in addition to focusing on our institutional programs and some of these other things, helping our aspiring doctors achieve their success. There are aspects of growth mindset that are tied to diversity and equity, and I know that's something you're very passionate about too. So I'd love to bring you in to get your perspective on that.
Very much so. And one thing I want to comment on first is, Chris uses the word belief. That growth mindset is a belief about a capacity to improve over time, and that's absolutely true. A lot of people misconstrue growth mindset to be almost like such a, what's the word I'm looking for? A
platitude.
Platitude is a good word.
I was
That's
just guessing. I was just trying.
No, that is a good one. And thank you for that.
Yeah.
Almost magical thinking, taken to the extreme. Like, if I just believe, then I'll be able to achieve
anything.
Click your heels. And but in fact, it's not just. It is a belief. It's an attitude. It's a behavioral. It's a behavioral approach to learning that reflects a psychological and emotional approach to learning that focuses as much, if not more, on the process as on the outcomes. And so this idea that if a student just tries harder, that they'll be able to achieve greater outcomes, that's not growth mindset. That's a gross simplification of and misrepresentation of growth mindset. And instead we have to talk with students about the lived experience of learning, and what are the emotional and psychological aspects of learning that happen in real time as students struggle with content that is difficult, or with skill sets that they haven't mastered yet, and they're sitting with that discomfort. What are the ways in which learners can manage their emotions, manage their psychological responses to challenges that then translate to certain behaviors. And so it's that combination of a belief in the efficacy of effort, of trying things again, of seeing failure as a learning opportunity rather than as something to be ashamed of and to hide away, or to turn away from, and the connection between critical analysis of what is necessary for someone to achieve the learning goals that they've set for themselves, and the learning context in which they are operating in that moment or in that real time. I joke that I have a shrine to Carol Dweck in my apartment because I think that this is so powerful, and fundamentally it's powerful because it's simple. It's actually quite simple in how this can translate in real life for students. What I think is particularly powerful is the notion of not having to achieve perfection from the start, or not even having to achieve perfection at all. I mean, nobody can achieve perfection. So instead, it's reframing what learning is about. It's about growth. It's about development. It's about being able to be better today than you were yesterday at something, or having more knowledge, or even better than that, more wisdom today than I did yesterday. So it's process oriented. It's never ending because it is a process.
I liked where you mentioned the word getting comfortable with your discomfort. That to me seems like a big idea. It reminds me of the learning science concept of desirable difficulty, where like you want to give the learner enough of a challenge so that she's struggling, but not so much of a challenge that she throws up her hands and gets frustrated. And then also understand that if you're uncomfortable, you're actually learning. So like if you're instead gravitating towards things that are easy, that sort of reinforce your confidence, there's an element to that that's beneficial, particularly as a test prep company. We understand like you need to be able to handle the things that you can handle them fast, but you're not really growing as an individual unless you're putting yourself into challenging places where you actually are a little uncomfortable in who you are becoming. And to me, that ties, and maybe back to you, Chris, a little, although I definitely want to get back to you on this, Jeff, too, is the notion of mindfulness and the imposter syndrome. So like there is that, in some ways, that discomfort manifests itself in that internal voice that is talking to you about your own limitations. And then the sort of eureka moment, why Jeff may have a shrine to, we all may have small shrines to Carol Dweck in our homes.
I'm going to make mine bigger.
Yeah, please. Why not?
It's going to grow.
Exactly. But the reason why it's such a simple idea, but it's so important, is that unless we get comfortable with that discomfort and we're able to quiet that voice that is saying you're an imposter, we're never going to grow.
You go back to the idea of the rock slide, the little pebble at the top. I'm struggling with this chemistry problem on an MCAT practice test or what have you. That may be true. And in fact, probably is a real stimulus in and of itself. It's really the implications of that, getting to larger and larger boulders in a flash, that causes the problems as much as anything else. And so where mindfulness comes in is kind of noticing those thoughts from the get-go, if possible, to say, oh, I'm having a thought that this is a difficult problem. Oh, I'm having another thought that I'm thinking this means I am not cut out for med school, or I'm never going to be a doctor, or I'm never going to be happy in my life. You know, these, when you say them out loud, they sort of sound ridiculous, and yet when we talk about this with students, they nod their heads and almost with shame, and they shouldn't feel that shame because we all do this,
Yes.
right? So the mindfulness where that plays in, and it shouldn't just be an instrumental thing that one does. It should be something that, and I'm saying this as a talk the talker on mindfulness, but ideally it's something that, we start to notice our present experience more and more, and can anchor ourselves in that. I try to use my breath from time to time, just, the in, hold, out kind of thing. And that helps me interrupt the cascade because it happens, but I'm sort of distant from it. And as a result, then I can recognize that big boulder at the bottom that's, hey, you don't belong here, which is kind of written on the side of the imposter syndrome boulder.
Yes.
Is, oh, I am not meant to be here. This particular little pebble at the top of the struggle with the chemistry problem is an indicator of that.
Right.
Well, that causal link is the thing to kind of notice, and without noticing it, you never challenge it.
Right.
But by noticing it, you can start to surface it and challenge it. And maybe to get back to a point you made earlier around, for underrepresented populations going into health professions, it is worth putting in some inoculation, like you are smart, you do have the inherent capability to do this, is partly to counter years and years of societal cascades and rock slides in the mind that have said, no, you're not supposed to be here. A Black woman is not supposed to be a doctor,
right,
etc. Those kinds of conclusions that come at the bottom of lots and lots of rock slides. It may require more countering. Explicitly.
Yeah, and I think there's two elements to what you were talking about there too, where there's the internal dialogue that is growth mindset, which is, who am I, what can I be? And then there's the external pressures based on your identity, where society writ large, and whatever that might mean, is saying someone who looks like you, someone who identifies the way that you identify, is not really cut out for this type of job. And then that can feed into the cascade you're talking about, where then we all have self-limiting beliefs. Even the most successful, ambitious people out there have moments of doubt. That's actually healthy. But I'd love to get your perspective on this, Jeff, too, because I know it's something we've talked about a bunch, and I know it's something you're passionate about too, like the connection between growth mindset and sort of societal impact that maybe could send your self-limiting beliefs on a sort of downward spiral, the way Chris has described
well,
it.
And the metaphor of the boulder cascade is a really beautiful one, because it also leads then to a kind of understanding that fixed mindset is a pattern of thinking about yourself as a learner, and the grooves that perhaps you continuously find yourself thinking through, those patterns of thoughts, those patterns of emotional reactions, those are grooved into our brain over time, both from internal and external forces. And what growth mindset does is, in a way, it serves as a kind of antidote to those deeply set grooves that that sort of channel the kind of thinking about yourself as a learner, and almost sort of like it flattens those grooves out so that there's more of an opportunity to think of yourself differently as a learner, or in relation to yourself as a learner. And in particular for students who experience marginalization or minoritization in educational spaces, where educational spaces have not necessarily been safe, supportive, or affirming spaces, those grooves can be very deep in the minds of someone who has experienced marginalization in educational spaces, and who has been told directly or indirectly that this isn't the space for you, or you haven't earned the intellectual right to be here.
Right.
I mean, I think so frequently about the, about what in particular Black and Brown students have shared with me in conversation about their aspirations in pursuing the health professions. The negative messages that they receive, that they're not smart enough, they're not intelligent enough to be here, that there's an invalidation of the intelligence. Heck, there's an invalidation of their humanity. Let's start there. and and the negative impact over time of hearing those messages, internalizing them, it can create a condition where, as a learner, a student, it simply does not have the belief in themselves as someone capable of learning this tough material or achieving the skills necessary for moving on into graduate medical education,
right,
or undergraduate medical education. So growth mindset provides at least a framework for loosening those grooves and releasing people from these patterns of thinking that get them caught in this negative feedback loop of I'm struggling, therefore I'm not capable of doing this, therefore I'm not I have no right to be here.
Right.
And one way we've talked about Jeff, one way to empower growth mindset further is to realize you're not alone in feeling that struggle, in feeling that, stereotype threat is a thing like, oh, if you are reminded of your status as underrepresented, then you could actually perform worse.
Right.
Because those societal grooves are reactivated, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of you are not alone in feeling these threats, you are not alone in having these struggles, and sort of coming outside of that becomes itself empowering and sort of flattening out, because then you can come outside of your own cave where you've been locked in with your ego and shame, and say, oh, wait a second, there are a bunch of other caves on this mountain. Hey, everybody, let's come on out, and we can all change we can all move forward.
Right.
And we can share with each other how we are approaching this material. It doesn't have to be the sort of passive, I'm just the recipient of learning,
right,
and under control of someone else, but rather I can create the learning environment, and I can help recreate it together with others.
Right.
That particularly plays out in the caring profession.
Yeah. Well, and also the thing that I love about growth mindset is that it's actually based in neurobiology. Like it's not magical thinking, right? It's not magical thinking. It's not wishful thinking. It actually is rooted in what we understand at the present moment to be the plasticity of the brain, and how the brain can change, and neural connections are created with new experiences. So this notion of change through experience, which then impacts even our intelligence and our skill sets, it's rooted in something real. It's rooted in something material. It's rooted in the actual brain, anatomy and physiology. And when students begin to understand a little bit about that, then they can begin to move into more of a concrete understanding of, oh, there's value in trying things. And in fact, there's value in trying things together, because communally we can achieve more than if we try each of this ourselves and struggle. Let's pool our resources. Let's pool our collective mind power, and solve problems together, which then begins to transform the culture of learning from competition to collaboration, which then connects to the transformation of the work environment in the healthcare setting, where there's been a dramatic shift over the years, and a meaningful one towards interdisciplinary care-based, a team-based care delivery.
And that I wanted to move in this direction too, just more around we've talked about what it feels like as a learner, but also how as an educator, because many of our listeners are educators or trying to facilitate that environment. I was talking recently about the impeachment inquiry and how,
are you really going to go there?
I'm going to go far enough. I'll dance. It's go
time. Dance on the edge.
Dance on the edge. But like just the amount of noise and sort of fight or flight that is inspired by contemporary culture, where why Carol Dweck resonates with me and other social emotional. I like to say I get social emotional, baby.
Hey,
yeah,
I'll chime in.
I try to bring in as much Whitney as I can on this show. But
Oh, that was Whitney.
well, that was
okay.
Growth mindset. I'll keep working on it.
To have a fixed mindset.
Yeah, it's all good. But the reason why I think some of that is so important is that if you're teaching from a purely cognitive lens,
Mm-hmm.
you're frequently going to miss the learner.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not cultivating an environment that is safe
Mm-hmm.
and focused on like positive outcomes for everyone who's there,
Mm-hmm.
you're not really going to set up your learners for success.
Right.
So I know both of you have spent, as all three of us have spent plenty of time in a teaching capacity. I'd love to get each of your perspectives on sort of the fact that you're helping the whole student, you're helping the whole like sort of community of learning to kind of come together and feel safe, because there is neurobiology associated with that too.
Right. Chris and I were talking about this earlier, and we referenced the lizard brain.
Yes.
And how,
Yes.
you know, when you're confronted with a challenge or something that's unknown, or what you perceive to be an existential threat, the lizard brain activates.
Yes.
You know, and I'm not a neurobiologist, so I'm using this kind of metaphor.
That's your imposter syndrome. Just act like an expert.
But you know, that lizard brain activation. Oh, I have to protect myself. I have to do everything possible to survive this.
Yes.
And to come out alive on the other side. And with students, there's, you know, I mean, well, with any learning, the primary experience is discomfort.
Yes.
I mean, and let's be honest. I mean, we live our lives through the lens of emotions. I mean, that's always sort of front and center.
Yep.
So, you know, to engage with learners purely through a cognitive lens, or treating someone just as a brain on a stick,
yes.
You know,
which is quite tasty.
Yes, right. We'll save that for the street food episode.
Right. You know, that's you're not engaging the whole person. And for students sitting in the classroom, we've all sat in the classroom as students. The emotions can be either the conduit to understanding, or they can be a tremendous barrier to the learning and understanding and participating in that process. So, you know, when I have taught, you know, pre-med students preparing for the MCAT, or pre-dental students preparing for the DAT, the thing I stress to them is, first of all, this is not going to kill you.
Yes.
So let's talk about let's try to level set the risk here. Like, what is the actual risk?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, there are things to talk about that there's some risk involved in any of this, but let's level set it so that it isn't the existential risk that you may feel that it is coming into the test prep classroom.
Right.
Let's get a handle on what this test actually is. What does it mean? And actually, that's the most important thing. What does it mean to you?
Right.
Why are you doing this? What is the value of this test to you relative to your larger goals? Because, of course, nobody is taking a standardized test for the sake of the standardized test.
Sure. Yep.
So, you know, engaging a student in the emotions that they have and validating the emotions, but then challenging the student as an adult learner to interrogate themselves. Well, what is this emotion telling me?
Right.
What is it tempting me to do? Is it tempting me to pull the covers over my head and just give up? Or is it an emotion that maybe is uncomfortable for me, but I can harness it?
Yes.
I can redirect it.
Yes.
And then I can use the energy there to continue in the behaviors that I know are going to move me forward.
Yeah.
Right. And we have to keep talking about this because, you know, I've seen instructional design checklists that first talk about any emotional or motivational element, like in 12 sub point C, you know, and everything up to that is all cognitive. Right?
Yes.
And sure, you need the cognitive level to be working.
Sure.
But the emotional and it's also a challenge overcoming that bias towards learning is just cognitive, and then there's an emotional icing you put on it that just makes the medicine go down a little sweeter. Overcoming that sort of false analogy in our head is really important, because our students feel that too. They think, oh, this is all the soft stuff. If I'm pre-med, give me the hard stuff.
Yeah, they start checking their phone, like, okay, you're getting all...
It's even the bias of like hard science versus, this is psych-soc stuff. Like, oh, I don't want to hear about Yerkes Dodson and like anything else around this. But yeah, you go back to neurobiology, as hardcore as it comes, and you say, hey, you want to get something into long-term memory marked for retrieval later, that's got to be marked by your hippocampus on the way in. And what marks it? The amygdala kicking in the emotion.
Yep.
And if your amygdala is damaged, you can't make new strong memories.
Right.
Right. And that's, I'm impostering that. But yes, this is
you had me at amygdala. I mean, you hit both the amygdala and the hippocampus. I'm just waiting for you to hit the thalamus, or I don't know. I'm running out of brain regions, but it's good stuff.
There's a brain region called the lizard brain.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, I also interestingly, and we need to be conscious of time because we could clearly keep going as long as we like. Maybe just keep doing it. But recently, I was watching Vox has released on Netflix The Mind Explained.
Oh,
it's really good, like a handful of 20, 30-minute videos. We were talking about it as good edutainment, an example of it. But when they were talking about mindfulness, they did talk about in Zen Buddhism, there's a lot of talk of the monkey brain and the actual regions of your brain that, just perseverate on these low value questions like, can I do it? Can I do it? Within Zen Buddhism, they do talk about that. That's the monkey brain, and there are actual brain regions that are activated when you're in that mode. And I still feel like we're at despite the thousands of years of medical research,
we're just scratching.
We're really just scratching the surface.
Yeah, sadly, we're human 1.0.
Yes.
I'd much rather be living my life as a human 3.0 or
oh my
4.0.
God.
Without that lizard brain.
Yeah.
But, unfortunately.
But I guess like to sort of bring it full circle, like in some ways you have to embrace the lizard brain as part of your authentic human experience. And then to perform at an optimal level, you need to understand, I will feel that anxiety. I mean, you mentioned Yerkes Dodson, which, you had me at amygdala and then you threw in a little Yerkes Dodson, but like that's showing that there is sort of that sweet spot of, if you're not feeling any sense of fight or flight, you're probably not going to perform optimally. So then there's a level of psychological arousal that is optimal for peak performance, but then if it goes too far, you can panic and choke.
And this is the kind of thing where I mentally, when I've been dealing with this since high school, when I first started to sing, and then I was in a cappella groups.
Oh, really?
And yeah.
Do you do any Whitney Houston?
Well, I no.
Okay.
And rock
growth
mindset
though, like you
one day.
Yeah.
Because I will always love you.
The power of yes.
It's true.
So
the children are our future.
Children are our future.
Yeah.
And so like the first time on stage, I was so terrified, and I just thought of myself literally diving into the crowd, like, and this brings us back to the idea of you're not alone in this. Like there's some kind of other, some kind of, if I stay in the cave with my ego and it's all about me and I'm just reflecting my shame and my anxiety back on myself, and I never get out of there, then it's just going to amplify and overwhelm me. But somehow getting outside and feeling like there's a bigger purpose here. That somehow providing some entertainment or something like that, and just literally giving myself to the audience has always been the thing that has empowered me as a teacher, as an introverted teacher.
Sure.
To get past myself in those moments. And I think that's something that as educators, I look for I don't know, but I in trying to create an environment where everyone feels welcome and everyone feels empowered, people also need to be able to sit with the discomfort and take risks and stretch themselves. That is what growth mindset is about. And creating that environment, I mean,
psychological safety is the big term. Yeah.
Although I've started to recognize a power in reframing safe space to brave space, where you
got a double on that. That was
I
good.
know, I'm not taking credit for the concept of brave space. But it's one that acknowledges that there is risk involved.
Yes.
That you do have to put yourself out there in order to grow.
Yes.
And brave space, without obviously without obviously referring to this, I think also speaks to the ethics of the community in which the individual is a part. And what is the ethics of a learning community to itself and to the individual members that comprise that community? Because everyone who's engaged in learning is taking risks.
Right.
So how can we be better with each other and for each other in the context of risk taking that is somewhat calculated? I mean, we always want to try to be mindful of what risks we're taking, and and what is that sweet spot where we feel somewhat challenged but not completely overwhelmed. But how can we as a community of learners move beyond our ego, as you've been talking about, Chris, and really embrace that learning is a relational experience, it's a communal experience, or certainly in its sort of ideal or optimal expression, it's relational and it's communal. But coming along with that then is this, is how are we engaging with each other in that learning community? And then that's, that can touch on classroom dynamics and how does the teacher frame how does the teacher frame being wrong, or how does a teacher invite students to ask questions?
Right.
When I was a teacher, one of the most transformational things that I learned in my own teacher training was the power of reframing the question to a classroom of who has any questions to what questions do you have? That expectation that there are questions without judgment.
Right.
I also, something I learned early on was this simultaneous low stakes response, which now you can do technologically. But the way I still like to do it is just, okay, everybody show me a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle. You can keep it close to your body so no one else sees it. But how are you feeling right now? And just everybody can give me, and even no response is a response, but just seeing that, okay, I'm going to get, rather than putting people on the spot constantly, or another technique I used is rolling dice to pick students, and so it becomes very public that it's at random and evenly spaced among all the students. Someone, it's not rolling dice in like Mike, you're 7,
right?
And and you're Snake Eyes, Jeff. It's not that. It's setting it up in such a way that everybody has an equal shot. And so, and that I first started doing on hearing about countering the bias of, say, as a science teacher, I'm going to let boys speak longer.
Right. No, I mean, so much to talk about. Even like it does sound like we could talk at length about almost creating a community of practice around teaching, which is something I've talked a lot about aspirationally for a show like Trending in Education. Like if we could find teachers in diverse experiences talking about how they cultivate learning communities and how they share practices and tips. I think there's a wealth of information that, again, we're just kind of scratching the surface of. Be conscious of time, although I'd love to have both of you back. So thank you both for breaking the seal and joining us here. Typically, we like to ask our guests, what's capturing your imagination around the future of learning? Are there any trends that you're noticing? To get titular about it, it is Trending in Education. What trends are capturing your imagination? Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share in addition to growth mindset? What's emerging, what's new, and open it up to either of you. Also feel free to say safe place, no ideas, let's move on.
But let's make it a brave place.
Yeah, brave place, exactly. Yeah, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I think coming out of the conversations that I typically have in the context of the work that I do in Kaplan in support of institutional partnerships that are addressing historical exclusion of students from the STEM and health fields through the operations of structural racism, classism, and sexism, that relationship between the social forces of inequity and the concept of a student has of themselves. And in particular, sort of helping those who are within educational systems operating as mentors, coaches, and teachers, or as advisors, how can folks in those roles bring concepts from critical social theory to bear on the way that they advise or they coach or they mentor students, especially students who experience marginalization or minoritization? I mean, the hard fact of the matter is that outside of an HBCU, every academic institution in this country is a white serving institution,
right.
Predominantly white serving institution. And for students who are marginalized, in particular, because of race or ethnicity, those social forces are so complex, and they are very forceful. And I think that there's a very rich opportunity to bring the insights from critical social theory, like critical race theory and intersectionalism, to bear on the the relationship between a student and his or her advisee, his or her advisor or mentor or coach. And to begin to unpack the baggage or the trauma that marginalized students frequently will carry with them through their educational experiences, and what impact that has on them and their concept of themselves as learners.
Wow. Yeah. So I've heard if you want to write a book, you want to come up with ideas for a book, you should write a book. So if you want to come up with ideas for a podcast, you should ask Jeff for his thoughts, because it sounds like, there's plenty to talk about in terms of what you just outlined there. So again, thanks for that, and thanks for being on. Are you ready to follow that?
No, but I will try.
Yeah,
because I'm gonna dive into the discomfort. Actually, very related to that, in a maybe semi-oblique sense. The trend of rising data on students, that we can gather more and more and more students. So this is a question I'll pose that I've been wondering and in a way worried about. How do we create brave, safe spaces for students when we're gathering more and more data on them?
Yes.
Particular underserved. As we try to quote unquote diagnose so we can remediate an issue if we've got one, et cetera, et cetera. As it is, we test our students so much. I mean, we're in the business of helping students prepare for tests. And yet, the Heisenberg principle and sort of its popular form of, observing changes, what's observed. We have a challenge of, if we put cameras on students, we put Fitbits on them to measure heart rate and anxiety through pupil dilation and so forth. What is that data gonna be like? And how is it going to be used, and how can it be used in a trustworthy way? And how do we actually turn off the cameras and the Fitbits and the whatever else? How can we keep some non-observed spaces for students to grow and flop down and fail and get back up again?
Yeah. No, I love that. And the Heisenberg, you had me at Heisenberg too. So anyway, thanks very much to both Dr. Jeff Koetje and Chris Ryan here, joining Mike Palmer, Trending in Education. Wonderful conversation. I'd love to continue many of the topics we just raised. I think we're just scratching the surface, but hopefully our listeners are ready to lean into some discomfort and continue to listen and really engage in some of these really interesting ideas. So for those of you who are regular listeners, please continue to listen. And for those of you who are listening for a first time, thank you. And please come back again soon. So this is Trending in Education, and we'll be back next time.